Hey guys, I know we are making techno on this channel in different forms, melodic techno, sometimes hard techno, sometimes peak time techno, but you all heard the psytrance bassline before. In melodic techno and afterlife productions, they're often also in peak time techno, and today we want to have a special look at how those basslines work, especially in peak time techno, how to get them so upfront in the mix and so powerful. So in this video we're gonna do it all from scratch. I just want to show you real quick what that bassline will sound like, and then we're gonna go through all the important steps to get this Psy techno bassline. So I'm gonna start this by copying the MIDI clip, and what we have here is just A notes. And in the sub octave, right? So if I put Serum on here, which I have already, and it's just this basic patch, this is what we have. And it's very important to note that we are playing in the sub area down here, right around the 60 hertz, 55 hertz. And this is very important for us because we want this bassline to be very, very dark and low, right? So we start with this saw oscillator, and now what we want to do is we want to apply a filter, and we want to apply an envelope. So we can open the filter with each hit just a little bit to get this pluckiness in the sound, right? Because if we only add the filter, we are somewhere here, and we can't really hear the individual hits yet. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have the envelope 2 here. So if we open this, we get those hits, right? The opening of the envelope. So now the most important thing about this whole Psy bassline, like the first and one of the most important steps, is to get the envelopes right. And that's really difficult. It can be difficult sometimes. It's a combination of decay time, of sustain, of how much envelope you give, of if you're using resonance or not, if you're using drive or not, and essentially also which filter type are you using. All this is something that you have to take into consideration when you try to get this perfect pluck, not too long, not too short. And it's really perfect in a sense that it's perfect for your track. There is no perfect pluck, such as this is the one setting. I'm gonna say always 225 milliseconds decay, 0% sustain, and then you're good. That's not the case. It's always individual. It really depends on your kick drum, on the synthesizers, on everything around that. So yeah, we're gonna make sure to cover each of those little parameters. So first of all, if I put this very low, the decay, and I have no sustain, like 0% minus infinity, then let's say around 100. We slowly start to get this this pluckiness, right? It's already better. So now I have the option to open the cutoff a bit more to get more of the body, or I could also raise the sustain. I like to do it like this and maybe give a little bit more decay. A little less sustain then. You can really see, like if I raise sustain, I need lower decay. If I put the sustain down, I can have a little bit longer decay for it to still sound good. Now cutoff maybe a little higher. Maybe like this. I want the decay to be just a little shorter, so we get this real pluck here. Now let's see if we want to add some resonance in here. Right, this is what happens if you give a lot of resonance, maybe just a little bit. like this maybe. And like this we're good, right? So we were talking about the filter envelope all the time. The amp envelope is envelope number 1, right? It controls the volume of the sound. This one you can actually keep like this. You don't want to go with the sustain lower, because the problem that you're going to have is you want this bassline to be very, very strong. So you need it to have all the power in the sustain of the sound that it can have. And if you lower this, you will essentially lose a little bit of power. So next up, the second most important thing, another one that's very, 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 very helpful if you want your basslines to be strong, is to play with the phase. And there's 2 knobs about the phase here, right? We have the phase and random phase. So what does random phase do? Essentially, we can select the spot on our waveform where we want it to start each time it hits, right? And then at the same time, we have this random phase, and we can see that if I lower this down, this yellow area becomes smaller. So this yellow area is the randomized area. If I enable it like this, then you can see in this little yellow area, it's going to be random which spot is actually the starting point. So this one now isn't 100% the starting point all the time, the yellow line, but rather we do like an area with this random phase from which we can choose from which Serum can choose from. So if we go to 100%, this one doesn't really matter because it's random all the time, right? If we go to 0, this one matters the most because it's never random, so it's really all about where we put this one. And this is also what we want to do for the basslines today, because we don't want any random phases. The phases are which are heavily influencing the kind of the clicky sound of our bassline. You will really hear that if I have 0 randomization, and if I move the phase around, you will hear how it completely changes the vibe of the bassline. I'm going to show it to you. So we're going to start at 0 degree, right? So here we have a very plucky area, right? We're kind of missing a little bit. It's almost like going through a wavetable, right? So phase is really important. I would take it from somewhere over here. So we have a good pluck. And now you know the secret trick why your bassline might like feel a little not too strong when you do it with the random phase. Because if you do it with the random phase, each hit sounds a little different. If I choose my phase like strictly and say I want it to be exactly 249, whatever, and no randomization, I will get the same hit every time, and therefore my bassline will feel more stable. For the third step, what we have to do is sidechaining. And of course, there's no bassline without without some good sidechaining. Here, we can raise a question already. Do we really have to sidechain this? Because in the MIDI files that I showed in the beginning, there's kind of this gap where the kick hits. So there's not really a transient. Like if we would have it like this, we would have the hits everywhere, right? So this transient of this note definitely collides with the transient of the kick. Okay, so fair enough. Maybe we don't need to like separate the transient from each other, but what about the bass, right? Because right here we have a hit that is already giving a lot of bass, but our kick drum is also very long. It goes until here, like this is not one shot, this is classic, so I control the length with the length of the note, and there's just a little bit of release time. So we can, it's fair to say it's like almost half a bar, half a quarter, sorry. So here, this note technically is very, very much in the way with the kick drum. If we do it like this, then we're all good, right? Let me raise up the volume a little. But if we want this very, very rolling feeling, this feels more like jumping. If we want it to roll, we now have the problem that the kick and the first hit are in the way of each other. So what we're gonna do here is we're still gonna sidechain, but not the whole signal. How do we do this? We're gonna grab a multi-band dynamics, sidechain, and audio from kick, of course. So instead of sidechaining with a normal compressor which sidechains the full signal, we're just gonna sidechain one band with the multiband compressor. So we're gonna disable the high bands. Just for understanding, the high band sounds like this. It's 2.5K hertz and above. And we have this mid band, which is like 120 hertz to 2.5K. And then we have the difficult area, the sub bass, right? This one we want to kind of split from the kick. So this is the one we want to duck away with the kick drum. So I'm gonna disable the others like this, and I'm only gonna use the last one, the low band, right? So now the first thing is, where do we split? Where does this low band end? This frequency decides where this low band ends. If I put it higher, we have a lot. If I put it lower, we only have the bass, right? So what's also important is that there's always like this kind of split, so you will have some kind of different resonances around the area of the frequency. So we have to be very, very aware of what we're doing here, and we always should compare to before. It's not necessarily bad if the sound of the timbre of the sound changes a little bit because of the multi-band, but it should be better, right? It shouldn't be worse. If it's worse, don't do it like this. There's a lot of other options to sidechain only a sub bass. We're gonna do it like this today. Right, and I think it even boosts the bassline a little bit. This is what I find to happen a lot of times if you use this kind of technique. You can also use different plugins. Maybe just to show you real quick, what I use most of the times in my productions is this. This is Shaper Box, and it's essentially the same, right? I have multi-band, but right, I have two bands. I have the sub band and I have the high band, and I can draw individual shapes for the sidechaining. So this one is kind of what we are doing right now, right? Here's the kick, 1/8 note, and then 1/8 note of sub bass from the bass line, and here the bass line, only the first hit of the kick I want to put down, and then there's 3 full hits in this quarter, right? So you can also use a plugin like this, but everything works very well with multi-band dynamics by Ableton. So we have the kick drum ready, and we have the frequency ready. It's actually sounding pretty good, I think. No sidechaining done yet, right? This is only because of the split and the frequencies here. Yeah, and this one is very nice. As I said before, sometimes it doesn't sound nice, so you have to be very, very careful which frequencies you select. And now let's move on to the sidechaining part, right? So essentially we have above and below here, and the times. The times we're going to adjust in a minute. Below means that we can push stuff from below, and above means we can duck stuff from above, right? We want to do the second option. We want to decrease the volume. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here with the threshold like this. Still nothing happening because this is the ratio. And if we go like this into the red, we decrease the volume. This would be the other way around. This would increase the volume. We don't want that. We want to decrease. And you can immediately hear it if you have like monitors or good headphones that are representing the sub bass. You should actually do this for this video, for almost every video here on the channel. You can hear that the bassline is now moving in the sub. So now you can hear there's some sidechaining in effect, but we have a long release time, so it's a little bit too much. We should also look at this. You can see here the hits look like there's bass. And here they don't. The release is a little bit too long, right? What we need to do now is bring the release down. And now we get this shape, right? The first one looks like this, indicates there's no bass, and the second and the third hit, they have bass. So this is essentially, this is exactly what we wanted here, right? This hit, the first one of the three, shouldn't have sub bass because it overlaps with the kick, and then the other two can have sub bass, right? So like this, we are good to go. So how close are we to the preset that I prepared? Very close. Just a little difference in the sustain or decay times of the filter envelope. So this first step is really important, as I said before. Now let's move on to the next step. So now the question is, do we want to use more effects on this bassline? And the answer is oftentimes actually no, especially on the individual track. On the group track with the kick, it's very nice to glue it all together with a little bit of saturation, compression, whatever. But oftentimes what you find happening when you apply like distortion, for example, now let's use some saturator, this, and I want a more or less heavy setting. Let's go +3, -3, and the medium curve. You can hear it already gets this kind of acid character. If I boost just a little bit more, it becomes more obvious, right? And let's look at it again. You can see that the peaks are even lower than before, but it's completely like compressed. So this is maybe too much. Because you lose the actual feeling of the rolling, right? You need the transients for that. So what we're gonna do is maybe if we like the sound of the saturator, then just add it a little bit. It adds some interesting texture to it. Maybe let's adjust it a little bit by going down with the bass. Can you notice that even that's only 27%, it already takes away the energy of the bassline a little bit? I think like this is fine, like only 13% is what we have here. I think this is much better because we only boost a little bit in the low frequencies. We compress it a little bit through the saturation, but we don't take away the energy of the transients, and we don't change the tonal character too much. So this is very important. Also, let's talk about echoes real quick. We should be very careful with using echoes. I know there's a lot of people out there speaking about echoes on basslines, and the psytrance kind of techno bassline is really not the best case study for echoes on basslines. What we could do, of course, is we could make a chain, separate it, right, and add a little echo like this dotted eighth, or we can also make another type of echo. It doesn't really matter because we have notes on almost all the time, right? Almost every 16th has a note, except for the one with the kick, which we don't want to have a note either way because it would get sidechained by the kick, because we don't want the transients to interact. So it's a little bit weird and kind of redundant to use an echo, but if you want the stereo width, this is what you can do. So now you get this kind of offbeat feeling. We definitely should then add another sidechain compressor. This time we can use the normal one and do something like this. So the echo gets sidechained. We can also put it only on the echo. That's fine. Yeah, but anyway, right? This is what you could do to add a little bit of width to the sound. Is it really necessary? I mean, that's up to you, probably. There's also other ways to add width to the sound, and one way is actually the Haas effect trick, where you just use an echo like this in time mode, no feedback, no filter, right? You can disable the filter, 100% wet, stereo, no ping pong, stereo, and then you just delay one channel to the other by something in between 10 to 15 or maybe 20 milliseconds, right? Now you get a super wide bassline. Of course, you don't want that for your sub bass, right? So what you need to do then is kind of split the frequencies again and only do this for the higher frequencies. If you think that's necessary, there's ways to do it. I would say this bassline, especially if you want to sound like this, right? Like this usual Psy bassline in techno, then you're good to go with just a little bit of distortion and the least minimum amount of more effects and more textures that you can give through delays or anything. Which brings me to the last step, which is actually more advanced techniques on this, and not advanced in a way that they are better than what we're doing here, but rather that they kind of change the idea a little bit, because here the idea is just to have those really strong all the time 16th hits to make the track feel galloping. But what you can do, of course, is you can apply different grooves to your bassline, for example, like this. You can use the velocity for this. For example, do something like this. And therefore, of course, you have to map the velocity, right? So here we have velocity over the amplitude. Is an interesting vibe, right? Not necessarily the best. Maybe you would rather do it like this. Right, there's endless possibilities that you can adjust this now and make different rhythms, different grooves. And of course, the kind of best way to mix up the formula a little bit is changing the original source sound, right? Because we've been using saw waves, and I didn't speak a second about this. I just said we're going to use a saw wave. That's because saw waves are the easiest, the most obvious ones that work with this type of bassline. But actually, I've prepared some presets for you. Some of them are available as a download for you. Some of them are available only for our mentorship group. So if you're interested in that, there's a link up here. Now let's talk about the presets, right? For example, you could do something like this. What we have here is one saw wave, but also one triangle, which gets some frequency modulation by the sub oscillator in a square wave. It sounds like this. Just a different vibe, right? It just has a little bit different energy than this. The solo saw wave always feels like very aggressive and low. This one feels a little more jumpy, I think. Right, but you could also do, for example, something like this, where you have different octaves. Like this one is on +1 and it gets amplitude modulation, and this is like a really, really weird basic shape. Or maybe you could do something even like this, where you have a sine wave and you get frequency modulation from here. This This one's a bit more experimental, but it can work. Also with saw to saw frequency modulation. So it's all cool, and it really depends on what you want, right? So I hope this was helpful for you. Psytrance basslines are everywhere right now, and I think it's very important to know the fundamentals, right, if you want to use them. So this is everything that you got in this video, and now it's time for you to grab those presets that are available for free in the description and develop this idea to another level where you can really put your own ideas and visions of techno into it. So have a lot of fun with that, and see you next time on the channel.